Ishaq's surah opens with a section entitled,
Muhammad's Pure Descent from Adam. This is the book of the biography of the Apostle of Allah. Muhammad was the son of Abdallah, bin Abdul Muttalib, bin Hashim, bin Abd Manaf, bin Qusayy.
And so on, a total of 13 generations to Kana'ah. Ishaq lists another 15 generations back to Abraham and Ishmael. The accounting from Abraham to Noah and ultimately to Adam came directly out of Genesis, and is of little value in that we are all descendants of Adam and Noah. However, I'd like to apply some simple math to the more recent genealogy to show that the first Muslims were clueless. Qusayy, the founder of the scam that became Islam, preceded Mohammed by approximately 80 years, and Lute, the founder of the Ka'aba, preceded Qusayy by the same length of time. Similarly, Kana'ah could not have been more than 100 years removed from Lute, which puts us in the early part of the 4th century A.D. To make Muhammad's genealogy pure, 15 generations would have to span over 2,300 years. Put another way, the Jews, who maintained precise written records in their temple in anticipation of the Messiah, listed 41 generations from Abraham to Christ. Another 15 would be required to arrive at Kana'ah's time, a total of 56, nearly 4 times the Islamic number. While this may seem trivial in comparison to the sun setting in a muddy spring surrounded by extraterrestrials, it's not. Islam is completely dependent upon establishing a link between Abraham and the pagan rites practiced around the Kaaba. If their chronologies are errant by a factor of 400%, it does not bode well for the rest of their theory. The earliest record of Mecca, with even a modicum of veracity, pertains to the Jurham. They were alleged to have camped periodically in the valley that later became Mecca. Tabari, the earliest Muslim historian, would have us believe that the Jurham practiced pagan rites identical to current Islamic rituals in the 5th and 6th centuries A.D., and that this is the first historical indication of Mecca, its people, and shrine. The Muslims are out on a 2,500-year-old limb. Ishmael was born around 2000 B.C. There is no tangible evidence to connect the dots between the biblical character and Mecca, much less with Muhammad, Allah, and the Kaaba. 25 centuries of historical silence is a very long time, especially for an illiterate people. It was in the muddle of ignorance that Qusayy was about to found a family business and establish himself as Muhammad's mentor. Islam's unofficial patriarch was born at the end of the 5th century A.D.
Tabari. Qusayy asked his mother which tribe he came from. She answered, "You are the son of Kilab ibn Murrah, ibn Ka'b, ibn Luhay, ibn Ghalib, ibn Fir, ibn Malik, ibn al-Nadar, ibn Kinana al-Qurayshi."
To which he said, "Good grief, I think I'll change my name."
Your tribe lives in Mecca by the Kaaba. This revelation awoke in Qusayy a strong desire to return to Mecca and join his people, the Quraysh.
Mecca was hardly a prize, though. There were no permanent homes, only tents. Flash floods were a menace in the summer. Heat was unbearable, as there was no shade. People passed through, but no one lived in Mecca. Mom told her son,
"Wait for a sacred month and go with the pilgrimage." Qusayy waited until the sacred month arrived, and the pilgrims set out. When he reached Mecca and had completed the pilgrimage, he remained there.
One of the 5 pillars of Islam is to complete the Hajj pilgrimage to Mecca in the sacred month. This hadith proves that the rite was idolatrous 5 centuries before Muhammad said it was Islamic. Even Muhammad's name for the pilgrimage, Hajj and Umrah, were borrowed from his pagan past. The pagan Qusayy, arriving at the 10th village, established the model Muhammad would ultimately require Muslims to follow. But that's not all he did to inspire Islam's future prophet.
Ishaq. At the time Hulayl was in charge of the Kaaba and ruled in Mecca, Qusayy asked him for the hand of his daughter Hubba in marriage.
She was the wealthiest and best-connected woman in town. 5 generations later, Muhammad, abandoned and penniless, would marry Khadija, the wealthiest woman in Mecca, a family tradition. Settling in, the newlyweds made 4 babies. 2 of which were named after the local rock gods, underscoring the fraudulent nature of Muhammad's religious invention.
Hubba bore him Abd al-Dar, Abd Manaf, Abd al-Uzza, and Abd. His progeny increased, his wealth multiplied, and he became greatly honored.
Qusayy showed that he was a heathen idolater when he named his kids after rock idols. Yet he performed a pilgrimage to Mecca in a holy month. He moved in with the king, the custodian of the Ka'aba, and married his daughter. They named their first kids slave to the house, the most important things in their lives, their source of wealth and power. Then they honored their gods by naming their next 2 children after them. And while it's interesting that Allah didn't even get an honorable mention, that's not the biggest problem. These passages confirm that the Kaaba was a pagan shrine, and at best, Allah was just one of many gods. The veneration of the house of idols shows that it was unconnected to any monotheistic religion, Islam included. A hadith gives us a glimpse of what was to come.
Ishaq, Qusayy thought he had a better right to the Kaaba and to rule over Mecca than the Khuzas, since the Quraysh were the most noble and pure descendants of Ishmael.
The motivation for Islam can be condensed into a similar sentence. Muhammad thought he had a better right to the Kaaba and to rule over Mecca than his family. If you keep this in mind, everything associated with Islam's formation will make sense. The sages who crafted this tradition in Baghdad, a dozen generations after Qusayy's death, must have thought their audience would remain as ignorant as their religious teachings were preposterous. First, in an illiterate society, how would Qusayy know that he was any more a direct descendant of Ishmael than any other Arab? Ishmael had been sandals up for 2,500 years. Without copious and exacting written records, genealogies are impossible to establish after a handful of generations. Arabic, as a written language, had yet to be invented, and there were nearly 60 generations separating these men. Second, how would they purport to know what Qusayy thought? There were no written accounts to connect him and his thoughts to the day these hadith were written, 4 centuries later. Since this scenario is impossible, the only reason Muslim scholars felt compelled to legitimize Qusayy's right to the Kaaba and rule over Mecca was to justify his great-great-great-grandson's claim.
Tabari. He called upon his fellow tribesmen, the Quraysh, to expel the Khuza and to seize Mecca for themselves. They accepted his proposal and swore an oath of allegiance to him.
While I'm stunned the world hasn't exposed the scam that became Islam, I'm grateful that the Islamic scriptures make it so easy. Mohammed would do precisely the same thing. He called upon his raiders to conquer the Quraysh and seized control of the town. They accepted his proposal and swore oaths of allegiance to him. While we will cover these pledges later, suffice it to say for now, like Qusayy's oath, it was a call to arms. And as with Mohammed, the Meccans were the enemy, and the target was the Kaaba. Tabari, relying upon traditions collected by Ishaq, reports,
The Arabs, recognizing their religious duty, accompanied Qusayy. Marching to the Kaaba, they said, "We have better right to this than you." At that they opposed one another and began to fight. A fierce battle broke out, as a result of which Qusayy wrested from them the privileges which had been in their hands, thus denying them.
Little did they know how fraught with portent these words would be. They haunt us to this day. Before we leave the skirmish, I feel obliged to share the alternate peaceful version.
Tabari. Qusayy purchased the custodianship of the Kaaba for a skinful of wine and a lute.
While this variant earns kudos for nonviolence, it's hardly religious. Purchasing a shrine that stands at the center of Islamic life, their God's house, for things their religion outlaws, music and booze, is laughably ironic. It's also an example of conflicting truths.